Hi guys, and welcome to week 3 of Debates About Culture. In this week, we're going to explore the relationship between culture and the power of states. How do states promote and extend their influence over the rest of the world, and what relationship culture plays in that, in that influence, in that relationship, right? So we're going to talk about where states get this cultural power and how do they maintain it, and then we'll do a debate. So let's start by trying to understand where this cultural power comes from. So you look at these look at these images, and what do you see? What do you think about? Which countries come to your mind? You think of, well, look at the visual. Probably you think the USA. You think, I don't know, maybe France, right? I don't know, maybe, you don't think Korea, do you? You don't think any African country. Similarly with this, you think France, maybe, right? You think European countries, because that image, this product, cheese, is associated with those nations, and superheroes, unfortunately or fortunately, associated with some nations. Now, if you change these things, if I said like this was cheese made in China, you may be a little bit skeptical about this product. If I associated a superhero with, say, I don't know, Kenya, right? You may be a little bit skeptical with that idea as well, because you have preconceived notions of the relationship between countries and their image and their products. And some of these things are natural, right? So if a country invented this particular product, like cheese or champagne from France, that relationship is natural. A lot of other parts of this, though, this relationship is cultivated. Countries spend a lot of energy, effort, advertising, money, basically, developing this image of that nation to portray themselves as sophisticated, or portray themselves as industrial, portray themselves as artistic, so that other people around the world will associate those images with them. And part of portraying themselves is also, fortunately, unfortunately, portraying other people, right, as the opposite or as something else compared to them. So that's why the villains in Hollywood movies also have a strong correlation with who America is fighting at that point in time. If you watch James Bond movies, only the above 18 parts, I hope, then you will notice the correlation between the bad guys in those movies with whoever, America's bad guys were at the time. In the early movies, it was always the Russians, always the Russians. And then some of the bad guys became like Japanese, and then like Chinese people, like Orientals. And then, of course, Arabs and Muslims, all the bad guys. So the current bad guy theme, all these bad guys will speak Arabic. In a previous generation bad guy theme, all the bad guys will speak Russian. And the swing is coming back to Russian now, right? You can put that down to the success of Putin's dominance in the global era. But long story short, the point is that we have an idea of values that are associated with different countries, and those values are also associated with the products that they create. And they do this on purpose so that they can extend influence over other countries. And why do they extend this influence? Well, to sell you stuff, right? If you like a particular product like cheese, you want to buy that cheese from France. You don't want to buy that cheese from other countries. It makes it harder for other countries to then compete with you. It also buys them diplomatic influence, over you. Voters of that country will be more willing to support a president or a leader who draws relationships or who builds ties with countries also seen more favorably, right? If your nation said that we are going to build a strong relationship with America, a strong relationship with Australia, a strong relationship with X country portrayed positively in popular media, you feel like, yeah, okay, this seems good. I trust this leader. They take pictures with these other people. You're like, yeah, that seems cool. But if they're portrayed as forming the same relationships with other leaders who you either never heard about or you have negative ideas of, random country in Africa, you go like, yeah, whatever. That's page 7 news. I don't really care about it. Even if in reality, this other random country might be supporting or providing more tangible things for your country, right? You may be buying cheaper goods and minerals from that country. There may be more opportunities to invest and develop. That person, that individual, that country may be more cooperative than this other power. But it's all because of your perceptions, right? So this week, we're going to explore that. We're going to explore the relationship between hard power and soft power. That culture, in the previous weeks, we talked about culture as an individual or community level concept and idea. How individuals have culture and identity, right? Now we're going to talk about it from a state level. You can also talk about it from an organization, company level. Companies create, promote, and brand their culture, and countries do the same thing too. They create brands around their country, right? It was a dynamic Korea, and then now it's sparkling Korea, and then, I don't know, some other kind of toothpaste theme will be invented at some point. But a lot of countries will do this, and then use that so that other countries recognize them. Everywhere I go, people know Malaysia is truly Asia. It's pretty much the most successful branding campaign. Heck, the most successful thing my country has ever done, and brand themselves as truly Asia. And if you haven't heard of that before, you've heard of it now. So how do countries do this? And to extend this, and all of these things are called soft power, right? So soft power is culture. Soft power is media. Soft power is diplomacy. So soft power basically thinks that is intangible. You can't count. You can measure the impact by say, if you do a survey or look at how people rate and value. Soft power is also, in some circles, measured as trade. So you can count the amount of money that people trade with, right? But all of these things have a relationship with each other. Hard power is easier to quantify. Hard power is military. Pretty much. Either like domestic military strength, the number of tanks, ships, guns, soldiers, mines, nuclear warheads that you have, and also the bases you have overseas, the military arrangements and relationships you have with other people. All of those things are hard power. Okay? So countries try to develop both. If you want to be a superpower, you need to have both hard power and soft power. And the debates nowadays are about which one of these things are more important. Previously, it was just chase both. But the strategy is different for different countries. If I'm a smallish nation, there's no way you're going to be able to compete and with hard power of other countries. It takes a huge amount of investment to build a huge, army and military. America, the number one leader of military power around the world, spends more money on their military than the next 20 countries or so, right? Next 10 or 20 countries combined. Right? So if that's the list of top 10 countries, America's spending is more than the others all combined. That's a lot of money. It's a huge investment too. It means that America doesn't spend as much on other things. They don't spend as much on education sometimes compared to some European countries. They don't spend as much on infrastructure and comparatively to other developing countries too. They don't spend as much on healthcare, and that creates other problems. So there's a trade-off in terms of how much you develop your hard power if you want to go down that hard power route, right? But if you want to be a solid superpower, you kind of need to do that, right? It's a remnant from how countries used to operate in the past, in a long time ago. You always need a military. Nowadays, maybe not that much, but countries still feel a little bit insecure if you don't have a military. And if the other country that is super military, the advantage is you get to lean on other countries, you get to give them support. So part of how America gets many friends around the world is they offer them military coverage. I put a base in your country, I help you defend your country from, dodgy people. America wins because now they can extend their influence. They have a base somewhere else. And America has by far the most number of bases, about like 100 bases or something all around the world. Yes, like 100 bases in all these countries around the world. And the other country benefits because now they have this partnership with America. Russia also does the same thing. China starting to do the same thing, okay, to build their relationships with other countries, first through military partnerships and tie-ups, but secondly through building bases, right? So that's hard power. How important is it and what relationship it plays with countries and in spreading their influence? The opposite of hard power, like we said, Soft power, culture, media, diplomacy, trade, all of those different things. Now, powerful nations need to have both. So when you think of America, people think of the army, the military, but if you think of the other parts of America, what about American soft power, right? You think of American movies, you think of Hollywood, okay? In a few weeks, everybody's going to be very concerned about what are the best movies in the world and who won the Oscars, and that is primarily branding around America's movie industry. The whole world will watch and be really, really excited about what some human being wears as he or she walks down a carpet, and what they will say when they pick up a statue for acting that they did in a movie. You think of McDonald's, right? A brand, an American brand that exists in pretty much every country, or Starbucks, right? Many examples of American capitalism and products from America. And these things are a huge part of American branding. And you can look deeper within those things too. So not just the objects, but what those objects represent. In American movies, they very often portray American superiority and American power. America saves the world from aliens or bad people, and so on and so forth, right? So in the next week, we're going to go into movies a little bit more, but now we just want to understand how countries brand and where this branding comes from and how do we compare those two elements of branding, okay? So hard power, soft power. Done? Basically about power. To also, as usual, to make this, to ground this a little bit more, we'll look into a topic. Okay, so the topic we want to discuss today is that culture plays a stronger role than military power in perpetuating American influence around the world. Think about that for 3 seconds while I drink my coffee. Right, so first, as usual, let's look at the context. As I've discussed earlier, this is primarily a debate about America. And where does American influence not so much come from, but where it stays right now? So in these debates, you're asked to assess which of these two factors are more responsible for perpetuating American influence. So not for causing it, right? So you don't have to go back into like the Cold War. You can discuss them, but we're not at that stage now. It's not about how America got its power, but rather how is America going to continue its power, right? So the context could be in a world where that American power is waning, perhaps, if that's how you want to set it up. And I think that's advantageous for you to set it up that way if you want to talk about culture, because the hard power is clearly established. Here you want to say that the culture is kind of taking over. So the context could be where it's waning, where the world is, merging together in terms of how they communicate, where many countries are scaling down their hard power. So hard power can be seen as a disadvantage, right? Rather than an advantage for you. Okay. So that's pretty much the context that you can set up in a changing world where hard power is getting less relevant. Of course, you can contest this, and the debate will be about this relationship between hard and soft power. Now, this is a debate about comparison. So you don't have to propose anything, but you need to provide a standard, right? So what is your standard for stronger role? How do you value stronger role, right? So you have to make a strong correlation between that and perpetuating. You have to show how it has a measurably larger influence than military power. Okay, so you need to clearly define these two things, and I think you can define them the way I talked about earlier. Military power, pretty clear cut. Culture, give a few examples of culture. Don't have to become too academic about it, but give some of those examples. The McDonald's, talk about the products, right? The movies, I think those are really good ones. And then from there, you make the arguments around it, right? But it's a debate about comparison. You don't have to say that a military power has no role whatsoever. Okay, people often make this mistake and show that the thing that you're comparing against is totally crap. You don't have to do that. You can say the military power is really effective in these situations. They will probably still be important, and you still think they will always be in one of those top numbers of military ranked countries. That's just impossible to move away from. But what is the more important part? but is more influential. Okay. You can even segment and you can say military power is important for these types of countries, countries that have conflicts, countries that are like, have really bad neighbors they don't get along with. And that's the minority of countries. But the majority of countries that engage in trade, countries that consume lots of products, for those countries, for this broader set, it's culture, baby. It's culture, right? So, you use tools like that to compare. But you don't have to kill one over the other. Show why your standard of, say, affects more countries is longer lasting will be the better way to pick one over the other. The position that you should take on this is how I think culture as a tool applies to more countries, right? More situations, more sustainable. So you pick more things and you try to get that quality, the quantity, but also try to get the quality. Show how it is something that's tied in to those countries and can last a lot longer. This will be a little bit clearer when we look at our arguments. So these are 3 arguments I think you can run on the side. The first one is that culture is ingrained. The second one is that the effects of culture are much deeper. And the third one is that military power has waning and negative influence. Or is waning and has a negative influence. But you know what I mean. So, number 1, culture is ingrained and cannot be easily removed. So, what do I mean by this is that once the culture enters a country, it becomes tied into the notion of that country, right? So you can discuss about this broadly in terms of culture. So talk about how countries, for example, even simple things like starting to learn English, like everybody learns English. How the media mimics and mocks, well, not mocks in a bad way, but mocks and compares and becomes like American culture, right? You talk about how over a long period of time, if you want to take a historical view, how modern cultures of countries were shaped by things that happened in the past. Infusions in your language, when people moved into other countries and then became ingrained and became part of that culture, right? To some extent, American culture is that way. A lot of the modern aspects of American culture, American food, and burgers and pizza and music are all an outcome, a result of immigrants coming to America, merging, and then becoming part of the modern American product. And maybe part of the reason why American culture is so successful is because it's so young and new and not clearly distinct, and can be then adapted into other countries, right? But that's your first argument. That's interesting too, if you want to discuss the unique advantages that American culture has, for example, over like Korean culture. It's harder for other countries to adapt to Korean culture. Even though Korean culture is far more distinct, easily recognizable, huge marketing tool, those things are great, but because it's so distinct, it also makes it harder for you to adapt to it. The fact that many people have been able to adapt to this American culture and then feed into it also makes it something that is more adaptable to other places and other areas, right? The second thing is that the effects of culture are much deeper. It affects someone's thinking and someone's identity. So there's a little bit of relationship with your first argument here. In the first argument, you talk about how once culture has set in, it cannot be changed and removed. In the second one, you say that once that happens, it really impacts you in a much more powerful way. So it makes me more pro-American, right? Even if I don't really realize that I've become more pro-American, I do. Because I've grown up watching Friends and all of these shows. Then when I visit America or I see other things produced in America, it all just seems more familiar to me because I have been kind of conditioned with these ideas, with the philosophies and the values and understanding of democracy and all of these things. It affects my thinking and my identity at a more subconscious and deeper level. Right. So the second argument here is the quality argument. You say the impact of culture on these individuals, on foreign governments, on consumers is far more long lasting. People have a desire for things American because of that culture, right? Not because of anything else, because you You feel like these things are positive things, and because you've grown up on it. The same way you miss home if you haven't been home. The same way you can miss a McDonald's burger, right? Because you've had it and you identify with it growing up, and it's become a part of your identity. Okay. So talk about here how that culture is something that's far more powerful in as a tool of shifting opinion. Thirdly, but not leastly, is talking about American military power, right? So you say that the American military power is waning and has a negative influence now, right? So the other countries are catching up because China has a lot more money to invest and to put into military power, and the impact of military power is also waning. Not all these countries need it as much. In a world where we've become more globalized and interdependent, we fight with each other a lot less. And America is also less willing to directly intervene in a lot of these conflicts. And that's the catch-22. Although America has a lot of guns, they're not really that keen on using them all the time, right? Because this is the fallout from Iraq and Afghanistan, and every intervention, they get very nervous about using it. And what's the point of hard power if you don't really use it? Right? So that's why they're not intervening in Syria as much, and even Libya wasn't all American. It was mostly French. So the role of military power is waning, and it also has more of a negative influence. Now, when people associate America with that military power, that association with brutality, the images you get is of Guantanamo, the images you get is of soldiers killing, murdering people, right? So it's not a good way to brand America anymore. A much better way is to focus on trade, focus on relationships, focus on diplomacy, right? So that's pretty much your Gov side. It's a comparison. You can move these arguments around to whichever you think is the far more powerful argument to start and work with, but that's pretty much the Gov side. Now, what about Op? So on Op, I think the Op position is kind of similar to the Govs in the sense that you don't want to say culture has no role whatsoever, right? But you compare. So you say that the military impact or the hard power is more important than the culture. And on Op, you can also be a little bit sneaky and show that the culture is kind of dependent on the military. That it lends in it itself is a type of culture that spreads, and why in order to have this other kind of the soft power, you need to have the hard power on which to build your soft power. Okay, so 3 arguments. The first one, the military power is tangible. Secondly, culture is fluid. Thirdly, the decline of American culture. Okay, so kind of mirrors the Gov side, but let's run through it one by one. The first one is that military power is tangible and strengthens culture. This is the strongest argument you can run on the Op side in support of hard power. And this is what hard power will always have over soft power. That is tangible. You can count, you can build, you can develop. It's a clear strategy. And America has a huge lead in that strategy. Soft power is intangible. Soft power moves, is fluid. It's really hard for you to measure those things, right? So develop the fact that it is tangible and talk about how it strengthens culture. It creates a basis for trust. When America provides security, then that country opens them up to trade. And then that trade opens them up to other stuff, right? It also in itself creates a culture, the military culture, the culture of strength, of protection, of patriotism. All of these things are associated with American values. So in American movies where they go around and save the world, you think that this is possible because they have such amazing, powerful hard power. If they didn't have these things, it wouldn't be possible for America to save the world from aliens, right? So they need to have this hard power in order for them to go on and save the world, okay? Secondly, culture is fluid and influenced by many sources. So this is a possession issue. So there is the Italian culture and American culture. There is, French. There's also different kinds of Asian values. And around the world, there's more competition when it comes to culture too. Cultures the cultural impact is fluid, right? So right now, a lot of people are starting to learn Chinese and be really interested and keen in Chinese culture. And previously, to be a successful like Chinese cultural artist or actor, you would go to America to kick off your career. Now you don't need to do that anymore. Now also Americans come to China to get their careers kicked off. Like the Transformers movie, partnership with China and Chinese brands, right? Because that's the growing industry and that's where the focus of the world is starting to tilt. So culture is fluid. This thing can move. It's trendy. Today, yeah, everybody's really keen on them. But in a couple of years, they may not be, right? Less and less people go to McDonald's even, and people move into healthy eating. So then McDonald's will start losing cultural value and start taking on a negative value, okay? So that's your second argument. The culture is moving and fluid and hard to pinpoint on who belongs to what. So even if most people have this American culture, they may not associate it with America, right? And it's actually quite interesting. You see many people may protest American policy, like get out of Iraq and so on and so forth, but they will still eat McDonald's. They will still use Apple phones. They will still use Facebook. They'll wear Nike shoes. But hey, America, get out of Iraq. So they don't make that leap. They don't make that connection between American consumerism and American policies. So it doesn't matter if America has this strong cultural tie with people, America doesn't get that diplomatic policy support or respect that you think they would get. And that only happens when they can offer this military power to their leadership and show the people that they're helping them, right? Last but not least, this idea of a decline, crash and burn, falling of American culture is viewed as something that's negative, something that's dying. So this is kind of like that McDonald's is disappearing, all these American things are bad, and on a people societal level, right? So the people are, there's this rise of obesity and American cultures leading to more inequality and a breaking down of American society. It isn't the thing that we idealize anymore. So we shouldn't embrace these notions of American culture. And you can show that this is a harder war to fight over. And this is not then what will be important to perpetuate American influence, right? And remember, that's the key. The debate is about what helps perpetuate American influence. So if on op, you can show that culture is a negative value and these things, it's dying and it's moving away, then you're not perpetuating the influence. If you can show that culture is more fluid and weak and can disappear, you aren't helping perpetuate the influence, right? So you say military hard power is solid, it will last forever. That is what will perpetuate the influence. There'll always be a need for it. There we go, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. At the end of the day, a debate about hard power versus soft power. But remember the big picture and talk about the relationship between countries and the culture and how they brand and push themselves. Okay, so there we go. Third week of culture. Hope you had fun because I definitely did.